during my first interview with my participants, he did mention that he feels more insecure within his own people who belong to Pakistan, and more specifically heterosexual people.
How these participants can navigate spaces in which they may not neither be fully identified with, nor entirely reject forms of this whiteness, as you describe them, white Western queerness.
How do we consider a space as queer, or how can a space be welcoming for, let's say, people of queer desire and subjectivity?
Where do I feel like I belong in terms of, say, my racial or diasporic identity, and where do I feel like I belong in terms of queer identity? Maybe there's a tension there and they don't neatly collapse into each other.
Marginalized queer communities often can create these alternative spaces that can operate according to different kind of social logics and also possibilities of belonging.
The black queer in America chose counter public spaces to present themselves because they did not want to be visible in the mainstream queer spaces or the public spaces.
Visibility is always treated as an ambivalent issue within queer theory. It may welcome recognition, but at the same time it may actually feed these processes of commodification and cooptation, possibly also increase risks of being targeted in violent ways.
What is the relationship with Britishness, or what is the idea of the sense of belonging or the claiming of Britishness that...
Your exploration of queer visibility within Manchester's public and queer spaces through the experiences of Pakistani diaspora highlighted a number of important questions around identity, belonging, representation, and the complexities of navigating multiple social and cultural contexts. It was fascinating to see how your work brings together debates on space, visibility, and intersectionality in such a nuanced way.
It's a wonderful initiative.
The Global South Network opened new horizons for judicial cooperations.
Global South Network provide a platform for meaningful dialogue and cooperation, fostering efforts to build a more equitable and resilient legal landscape.
GSN Network continues to expand areas of activity, further strengthening its impact and reach.
The universal concept of justice compels us to join our efforts, and this is the forum for promoting the same goal.
Well deserved for the hectic activity you have made. I am astonished, I am amazed, I was impressed.
May I at the outset commend you, Dr. Ayad, for the immense work that you're doing in the GSN, and the Global South Network is a much admired initiative.
It's commendable. South Network focuses on all disciplines and regions, creating a bridge between academia, civil society, legal community, etc.
We are being criticized for doing our job and for upholding the federal constitution. Like I have said in the past, I will not bend to such lame pressures and insinuations.
Dr. Norman Riat, the founder and convener of the Global South Network. Visionary leadership has established a vibrant forum where judges, academics, and practitioners from around the world can share and exchange ideas.
I would like to point out that Dr. Riyad's initiatives have not only enriched comparative judicial dialogue, have also fostered mutual understanding of the diverse challenges that courts face in safeguarding the rule of law and constitutionalism.
After all, what would you do as a colonizer from the global north, conditioned by a systemic othering mindset and driven by economic lust built on commodification, including the commodification of human beings?
This last question is not so easy, a bit complicated.
The Global South Network provides an important space to share experiences and learn good practices from one another.
Dialogue takes on particular importance thanks to Global South Network, which allow us to believe in a better world of the rule of law.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the 22nd seminar in Phase 5 of the International Interdisciplinary PhD in Progress weekly seminar series organized by the Global South Network. I would like to start the session with some introductions. I am Dr. Nouman Riayat. I am a lecturer in law at Leicester Law School, University of Leicester, and I've been running these sessions since March 2023. My research interests lie within the areas of judicial independence, constitutionalism, rule of law, mostly in developing democracies. It's a pleasure to chair today's session, PhD in Progress session, and I look forward to learning about presenters' research and engaging in the discussion that follows. I'm joined by three excellent discussants. Dr. Christian Klesse is the first discussant for today's session. Dr. Klesse is the professor of critical intimacies at the Sociology Department of Manchester Metropolitan University. His research focuses on sexuality, gender, and contemporary social movements. His work has made significant contributions to the study of non-monogamy and polyamory, LGBTQ+, politics, citizenship, race and ethnicity, embodiment, and qualitative research methodologies. His current research includes a collaborative project with John Binney examining transnational activism and solidarity in LGBTQ+ politics in Poland, as well as a study of how LGBTQ film festivals across Europe foster community building and contribute to the visibility and imagination of queer Europe. Through his scholarship, Dr. Klesse explores the ways in which sexual and gender politics are shaped by social, cultural, and political processes at both local and global levels. Dr. Tanvi Kanchan is the second discussant for today's session. Dr. Kanchan is a full-time postdoctoral researcher on medicine without doctors at the University of Edinburgh. Tanvi completed their doctoral research last year, in which they examined social media's affordances for queer and trans women to politically organize, negotiate identity, build community, and produce knowledge. They are particularly interested in a radical queer politics that deals seriously with issues of gender, caste, class, religion, and Hindu nationalism in the Indian context. Dr. Paulo Pires PP is the third discussant for today's session. Dr. PP is a lecturer in humanities and at the Interdisciplinary Institute for the Humanities, University of East Anglia. His research lies at the intersection of queer theory, decolonial methodologies, and social media, with a strong commitment to inclusive and equitable approaches to research and teaching. Dr. PP is the principal investigator of the Origam project, an arts-based decolonial participatory action research initiative developed in collaboration with Professor Thea Pittman of the University of Leeds and indigenous LGBTQIA+ communities in northeastern Brazil. Origam project explores how creative and collaborative audiovisual practices can enhance visibility, well-being, and social acceptance for indigenous, gender, and sexual minorities. Finally, it's my great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for today's seminar, Aqsa Chaudhury, who is a PhD candidate in Department of Sociology, University of York. Today, Aqsa will present part of her PhD project titled The Politics of Queer Visibility in Manchester's Queer and Public Spaces, a case study of Pakistani diaspora residing in Manchester. She will speak for about 30 to 35 minutes, followed by 5 to 10 minutes of comments from our discussants. If time permits, we will then open the floor for a 15-minute question and answer session with the audience. Aqsa, we are delighted to have you with us today, and the screen is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. It is a genuine privilege to be here and to be discussing my work with you all today. My name is Aqsa and I'm a PhD researcher at University of York. It's my second year, just in the process of recruitment of the participants. I've currently served as a graduate teaching assistant at University of York for the module called Understanding the Self and Society. The project I'm presenting today sits at the intersection of queer geographies, diaspora studies, and urban sociology, and it asks a question that I think is both sociologically significant and I would say politically urgent as well. The title of my research is The Politics of Queer Visibility in Manchester's Queer and Public Spaces, and it's a case study of Pakistani diaspora. So I want to take you through the research context, the theoretical framework that underpins it, and the methods I'm proposing and the contribution hopefully it will be making. Okay, so let me begin with a brief roadmap of where we're going today. As Noman mentioned, might take 30 minutes, but probably less than that. But I will start by situating the research, like why Manchester, why this community, and why now. And I will then introduce what I am calling the central problem of this study, which I frame as invisibility within visibility. From there, I will outline the theoretical framework, drawing on queer theory, queer geographies, intersectionality, and diaspora studies. And I will then present my proposed methods before closing with a discussion of the contribution this research aims to make. Right, so let me begin with the context. So Manchester occupies a unique and significant position in the UK's LGBTQ plus landscape. Canal Street and Gay Village have been quite central to the city's queer identity since at least the 1980s. They were famously portrayed as in Queer as Folk and have become internationally recognized symbols of queer urban life. It is a space of real symbolic and political importance as well. But it is also a space that has historically centered white Western expressions of queerness. The dominant aesthetic, cultural references, and social norms of the gay village are oriented around a particular vision of queer life, one that is largely white, largely middle class, and largely disconnected from the cultural context of many of Manchester's communities of colour. At the same time, Manchester is also home to one of the UK's oldest and most established Pakistani diaspora communities, a community with its own internal diversities, its own negotiations of belonging, its own experiences of marginalization, racism, and its own complex relationship with the questions of sexuality, gender, and religion as well. My research begins with a very simple but I think important observation. What happens when these two words overlap? When someone is both queer and Pakistani in Manchester, where do they belong, and what does visibility actually mean for them whilst living as a queer individual in Manchester? So these questions have remarkably received very little sustained academic attention, and that is the gap this research seeks to address. And so this brings me to what I'm framing as the central problem of this research, what I call being visible, invisible within the visibility. So the queer Pakistani individuals in Manchester face what I want to describe as dual and double bind, like dual marginalization, a form of marginalization that operates simultaneously from two directions. On one side, within LGBTQ plus spaces like the gay village, they encounter the hypervisibility of whiteness, the dominant aesthetic, the cultural references, the social norms, so all are oriented around white and Western queerness. Non-white bodies may be physically present in the spaces, but they're often socially marginalized. and like are made to feel like visitors rather than members of that space. Experiences of racialized exclusion, both subtle and explicit, and well documented in the broader literature, and my research seeks to understand how these dynamics play out in Manchester specifically. This also reminds me of Kemi Adeyemi's work about counter public spaces, how they formed in America for the Black queer community, and how they were forming their own counter public spaces to enjoy their identity, basically. So coming back to dual marginalization in context with Pakistani queer diaspora. So on the other side, within their own ethnic and diasporic communities, queer identities are frequently silenced, stigmatized, and rendered entirely invisible. For example, mosque or the Islamic community centers. The pressure of familial expectation, religious observance, and cultural norms around gender and sexuality mean that being openly queer can carry enormous personal and social costs within Pakistani community spaces. So the question that animates this research is this: where do you go when you do not fully belong in either space? How do individuals navigate this double marginalization? And crucially, what strategies, communities, and forms of belonging do they build in this response as well? To address these questions, my research draws on 4 interconnected theoretical frameworks. So the first is queer theory, and in particular Sarah Ahmad's work on queer phenomenology. For Ahmad, queerness is not simply an identity or category, but a spatial practice. Bodies are oriented towards or away from particular spaces, objects, and features in ways that are shaped by social norm and power relations. Some bodies feel at home in a space, others feel out of the place, disoriented, or unwelcome. This framework gives me a way of thinking about queer Pakistani experiences in Manchester that is attentive to the felt, embodied, and spatial dimensions of exclusion, not just in structural causes. The second is queer geographers, building on scholars like Beanie and Rushbrook, who argue that queer spaces are never simply spaces of liberation. They're simultaneously sites of inclusion and exclusion, shaped by the same hierarchies of race, class, and ethnicities that structure the wider society. The gay world is not outside of racism. It produces its own form of marginalization, and my research seeks to make those visible. There's also work by Amin Ghaziani who discussed about the gentrification of the queer places, so it's more like making the places for a capitalist purposes rather than a space for the queer people. And the third, I'm using intersectionality following Kimberly Crenshaw's foundational insight that race, religion, gender, and sexuality are not separate, additive axes of identity, but are mutually constitutive. Queer Pakistani experiences cannot be understood by looking at race alone, or sexuality alone, or religion alone. They are shaped by the complex and often contradictory interactions of all of these simultaneously. An intersectional framework is therefore not optional for this research, it is sort of essential. And the fourth is diaspora and belonging, drawing particularly on Bra's concept of diaspora space. For Bra's, belonging is not a fixed destination or a stable condition. It is something continuously negotiated in relation to others, in relation to place, in relation to memory and imagination. The concept of diaspora space captures the ways in which multiple histories and geographies are present simultaneously in a single location, and how belonging within that space is always contested and relational. Together, these 4 frameworks give the conceptual tools to approach queer Pakistani experiences in Manchester in a way that is theoretically rigorous, politically attentive, and generally open to complexity. A central research question asks, how do queer individuals from the Pakistani diaspora navigate and negotiate their visibility and belonging within Manchester's queer and public spaces? Underpinning this are the 3 sub-questions I got. They are the first asks how participants experience and make sense of inclusion and exclusion within LGBTQ+ spaces in Manchester specifically. I'm interested here not just in whether people feel included or excluded, but in how they make sense of those experiences. It's about the queer experiences within those spaces and how they navigated and the meanings they attach to them, and sort of the navigation in the practice as well. The second asks what spatial strategies participants employ to negotiate their presence across different social and urban contexts. So I'm interested in the full range of spaces people move through, not just the gay village or Canal Street, but their workplaces as well, their family homes, their native country, their community centers. I will be somehow looking at the digital spaces as well, and the city more broadly too. So how do people manage the different demands of different spaces? What tactics do they use? And the third asks how race, religion, gender, and sexuality intersect to shape experiences of belonging and marginalization. This question keeps the intersectional dimension of the research in the forefront throughout, basically. Right, so my proposed methodology is qualitative, creative, and participatory, and this is a deliberate and considered choice, as I've used mixed methods, basically. So like standard interviews methods are valuable, but they are not always adequate for capturing the spatial and embodied dimensions of experience that I'm most interested in, like how bodies would be behaving on those certain spaces. So I want to understand not obviously just what people think about visibility and belonging, but how they feel it in their bodies, in their movement through the city, in the moments when they adjust their behavior in response to a space or an audience. So the first is the walking interviews, where participants lead me through spaces that are meaningful to them in Manchester. This might be the gay village, or it might not be. It might be maybe a street corner. The point is that participants choose the spaces, and as we move through them together, they tell me what those spaces mean to them, what they feel, what they remember, what they avoid. So these conversations are grounded in the body's actual movement through the city, which I believe produce a qualitatively different kind of knowledge than a conversation in probably a cafe or a private room in a central library. With the walking method, I've recently just conducted my first interview, and I actually got a very rich data through it. I was walking with my participant in a park. It was my participant choice to be going through a park, and we saw a group of a Muslim community there in the park, and my participant avoided to go there. Obviously, it provides me with I haven't done the analysis yet, but obviously it tells a lot about how they would avoid certain spaces, even if it's a public space. So that sort of proves the point of having the walking interviews in order to get the rich data. The second is participatory place drawing, where participants are invited to draw or map their geographies of belonging and exclusion. So I'm drawing here on a growing body of research that demonstrate the value of creative methods of accessing knowledge and experience that verbal language sometimes struggles to articulate. So like where do they feel safe? Where do they feel visible in ways that feel good? Where do you feel exposed or like welcomed or unwelcomed? And the idea is to provide my participants with a sheet and some like colorful pencils, and the first question which I will be throwing at them to draw your Manchester. So rather than giving them the key points to where you feel welcomed or unwelcomed, or what is your space, so it will be the idea which will be going to their blank mind in front of a blank page to draw their Manchester, whatever comes in their mind. So it worked with my first participant as well, and I've actually been practicing this with my friends, so it actually is helpful. And the third is like semi-structured interviews, in-depth conversations that allow for the exploration of life histories, family dynamics, experiences of migration and diaspora, and the long-term negotiation of identity across different contexts. Crucially, I'm committed to conducting these in participants' preferred language, as I belong to the Pakistani Diaspora as well, so I am aiming to give the option of the dual language to my participants. It can be in Urdu or in English or a Punjabi. It's up to my participants. It's a given choice to them. And the location will be chosen by my participants as well, where they would generally feel safe and comfortable to speak to me about their experiences. Right, so let me close by situating the contribution this research aims to make, because I think it matters across several dimensions. So empirically, to my knowledge, there is currently very limited, sustained qualitative research on queer Pakistani experiences in Manchester specifically. And this project seeks to address that gap. The absence of this work from literature is definitely not accidental. It reflects a broader pattern in which racialized queer communities have been rendered invisible, not only in physical spaces, but in academic records as well. So this research is a direct attempt to address that. Theoretically, the study will develop an intersection analysis of race, religion, sexuality, and space within queer urban geographies, moving beyond the white-centric framework that have historically dominated the field, basically. I hope it will contribute to the growing body of work and that takes seriously the diversity within queer communities and refuses to retreat whiteness as the unmarked norm. Methodologically, I hope to demonstrate the value of creative and participatory approaches for research with communities whose experiences are spatial, embodied, and effective in a way that conventional method may not fully capture. And finally, and probably quite ambitious as well, I believe this research has direct policy and community relevance for LGBTQ+ organizations working to address racialized exclusion, for local government bodies developing equality strategies, and for community groups seeking to build more genuinely inclusive spaces. Visibility politics have real material consequences. Making queer Pakistani lives visible in the sociological record in itself is a political act. So don't really have analysis. It's just the beginning, since it's I'm still in the recruitment process and currently just working on my public speaking skills and just keep on presenting basically. And I'm still in the process of recruitment. I was initially I decided to use the snowballing, but it sort of failed. I have also been able to find a lot of Pakistani queer community online, but I don't really want to go on that side at the moment, as I'm in the process of making flyers and posters to post around in Manchester City Centre, the Central Library, University of Manchester's Library, and hopefully in MMUs and in Gay Village as well to attract the participants. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Aqsa, for a very engaging and thought-provoking presentation. Your exploration of queer visibility within Manchester's public and queer spaces through the experiences of Pakistani diaspora highlighted a number of important questions around identity, belonging, representation, and the complexities of navigating multiple social and cultural contexts. It was fascinating to see how your work brings together debates on space, visibility, and intersectionality in such a nuanced way. I would now like to invite our first discussant, Dr. Klesse, to offer their reflections and comments on Aqsa's presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Norman, for the introduction and for the invitation to be a respondent. And thank you so much also, Aqsa, for sharing your research ideas and your research design. And I would like to applaud you for a really, thoughtful, critical, innovative project, which is very, very important because racism in LGBTQ places needs to be tackled. And research into queer diasporas indicates that this is an ongoing problem. So, in response to your presentation, I would only offer, let's say, a few, modest thoughts, questions, which we may want to discuss in the remaining time. And some generic thoughts. So the first one refers to the kind of your key concept, your structure, your research around visibility, suggesting that white people have a hypervisibility in Manchester gay village, queer village, and that Pakistani queer people would have sort of a secondary reduced visibility, which is, I guess, certainly true. But I was just wondering whether you would want to reflect upon, let's say, the value of visibility within the framework of queer theory more generally, because my understanding is that visibility is always treated as an ambivalent issue within queer theory. It may welcome recognition, but at the same time, it may actually feed these processes of commodification and cooptation possibly also increase risks of being targeted in violent ways in a racist context. So I was just wanting to ask you to reflect a bit in our discussion about the potential ambivalence of visibility. So I've also been thinking about that in this context about the work of Edward Glissant, a Martinique Caribbean philosopher and theorist, who talks about opacity, about the right to be not recognized and recognizable within places which are maybe in their basic makeup already problematic. So that was my first thought, my first question. I mean, the second question is, I'm very impressed by your methodology, using creative methods, space mapping and walking interviews. And I just would like you to maybe expand a bit why you've chosen these methods, in particular in a kind of queer-inspired research project. So how do you think these methods resonate with wider themes in the queer methods debate? And the last question is about, the notion of space or place, let's put it this way. And I mean, when I read your abstract and your PowerPoint slides, first I thought your walking would be very much directed towards the village. But in your discussion, I realized that actually that's not necessarily the case. And I would like to, confirm you in that more open approach, because according to my understanding of, the literature on all kinds of, racialized queer diaspora spaces, it's not necessarily always, let's say, public spaces, which may be considered safe or welcoming or may offer belonging, but also private spaces, ephemeral, temporary spaces, and so on. So again, another topic for our discussion may be, how do we consider a space as queer, or how can a space be welcoming for, let's say, people of queer desire and subjectivity? Thank you, and I hope I didn't take over time here.
Thank you, Christian, for those insightful and constructive comments. Your reflections draw your attention to a number of important themes emerging from Aqsa's particularly around sexuality, identity, visibility. I would now like to invite our second discussant, Dr. Tanvi Kanchan, to share their reflections and comments on the presentation. Kanchan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Norman. Thank you, Aqsa. First, let me start off by saying thank you so much for your presentation. I really appreciate the thought that you've put into it. And I know it's also daunting to present work at an early stage when you feel like, well, this is just the framework and this is just what I plan to do, but, it's still to be done. So I know how daunting that can be, but I think, regardless, I think you gave us a really good overview of what you're planning to do and where you're coming at it from. I just also wanted to say that I really liked, I think echoing a lot of what Christian has said in terms of your methodology. I really enjoyed your methodology. I thought that the idea of walking interviews is fantastic. The idea of also kind of, what does placemaking, or what does place look like to you, and doing that in a kind of participatory ways is also sounds like a really great idea. And I think also one of the things that I also appreciated was, when you were talking about the one walking interview that you've done so far, and your participant kind of, avoiding going towards certain spaces. I think what that made me think of as well was that the tension between belonging in some ways and maybe not belonging in other ways can also be really productive to sit with and untangle. So I think there's a productive space there within. Where do I feel like I belong in terms of, say, my racial or diasporic identity, and where do I feel like I belong in terms of queer identity? And maybe there's a tension there and they don't neatly collapse into each other, but there can be something productive to think about there. I'll offer three kind of thoughts, comments, maybe provocations. They're not necessarily things you need to feel that you need to respond to right now, but maybe things to think about as you go through your project. The first thing that I was thinking about was in terms of how you're thinking about the notion of diaspora itself, and also kind of where that does or does not include, for instance, the tensions or the differences in belonging between migrants versus second or third or fourth generation, of South Asian or Pakistani specifically descent, but maybe British born and bred, because I think there can be sometimes those can be collapsed within each other, but I think that there's actually maybe a kind of different type of subjectivity that migrants might have as opposed to someone who was kind of born and brought up in Britain or in Manchester. And I think where that also comes in is what is the relationship with Britishness, or what is the idea of the sense of belonging or the claiming of Britishness that may or may not come or happen, I suppose. So it would be perhaps maybe interesting to use that as another kind of sub category or a sub investigation within your project to think about, does that differ? Maybe actually there's a lot of similarities. Where does that stem from? Because that was something that I was thinking about as well. I think another thing that also occurred to me through listening to you speak and looking at your material and your abstract is, I think, going back to the idea of space. I think space and place making is important, but I'm wondering what is the connection there with community, and if that's a different conceptual framework, or if they kind of, again, fall into each other, because space, of course, can be kind of differentially navigated and thought about differently. Space can be, of course, I'm sure I'm saying things we already know, but the kind of physical space, the affective space, so on and so forth. But I'm wondering where the aspect of community building comes in. So is it that I feel like I belong in this space because I have a community of other queer Pakistanis that I can relate to? I suppose it's more maybe an invitation to think about that as not just in terms of spatial geographies, but also perhaps in terms of people, communities, affective geographies. Perhaps there's something there, and what that relation is, maybe something that you can think about a bit more. And the last thing that I'll offer as a reflection is one of the things that actually occurred to me, which I thought might be interesting to think about, is what kinds of forms of solidarity, belonging, and placemaking exist for queer Pakistani diaspora folks and other racialized queer communities. Because, at least speaking from perhaps my own personal and also research experience, there tends to be a lot of, it's a lot of spaces might start off as being for a particular racialized queer community, but they often become a bit more expansive than that. I can imagine that there's some solidarities amongst other South Asian queer diaspora or other Black and brown folks who are queer in Pakistan, who are queer in Manchester in general. So I think that might be interesting to think about in terms of, again, solidarity in placemaking, as we are racialized and non-white. So what does that do to kind of bring us together as well? But I'll stop there. Thank you very much. And I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Tanvi, for those thoughtful and insightful comments. Your reflections have added another important dimension to our discussion of Aqsa's work, particularly in highlighting the broader social, cultural, and methodological questions that emerge from the project. Now I invite our third discussant to share his thoughts and comments on Aqsa's work. Paulo, over to you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to say thank you, Aqsa, for a thought-provoking presentation. This is clearly an important project that addresses a significant gap in the literature, especially concerning the experience of queer members of the Pakistani diaspora in Manchester. I also think that the proposed methodology, especially the combination of walking interviews and participatory place drawing, seems especially very well suited for this project because it captures this embodied navigating particular places and communities. Listening to the presentation, I found myself thinking about Jose Esteban Munoz, the concept of identification. I'm not sure if you are familiarized with this work or not, because since you already done on Boaz's notion of diaspora space, I wonder whether Munoz's work might also offer kind of an additional lens for thinking about how these participants can navigate spaces in which they may not neither be fully identified with, nor entirely reject forms of this whiteness, as you describe them, white Western queerness. So I'm not sure if you have considered whether this identification might be something that might help to explain how some participants navigate dominant forms of Western queerness, while also at the same time resisting them. So this is kind of just a thought and a point of discussion. I'm not sure if you have thought about that. Another thing that I was thinking of is about also when it comes to a spatial dimension of the project, because while Manchester established these queer spaces, clearly provide kind of an important focus. And here I also found myself wondering whether the participants might also describe forms of belonging that emerge outside of these recognized LGBTQ plus venues. And here what I thought was actually about the concept of queer heterotopias by Angela Jones, because as she suggests that marginalized queer communities often can create these alternative spaces that can operate according to different kind of social logics and also possibilities of belonging. And they might not even be, necessarily be formal queer venues, but could also be temporary, relational, and things like that. My last question was already addressed by Christian, which was about that particular aspect of visibility, because again, I think that sometimes invisibility can also form as a function, as a form of agency, protection, or even resistance in some ways. But yes, finally, I just want to say that I was struck by the project emphasis on inclusion and marginalization. These are clearly important dimensions of the experience that you are currently doing your investigation. And at the same time, also wondered whether the research might also reveal moments of, for instance, of joy, solidarity, or even resistance, or even a community formation in some ways. But overall, I think this is a promising and intellectual engaging project. And thank you very much for inviting me to be here today and to provide some feedback. I really enjoyed your presentation, so well done.
Thank you, Paulo, for very insightful comments, and I hope Aqsa will find these comments very useful for her ongoing PhD project. Aqsa, the screen is yours. Over to you, Aqsa.
Thank you so much, everyone, for such a positive feedback. With regards with my methodology, thank you so much. It was the core idea to use a participatory methodology for my research. Walking methods, participatory place drawing, and semi-structured interviews are methodologically aligned with the queer theory's core commitment to centering embodied, situated, and relational knowledge. So rather than extracting the data from my participants in a place, a controlled setting, I want my participants basically to take me to the places where they physically go and present their sort of identity or gender. So I wanted to I want to go with my participants to those places. So sort of the methods are sort of amalgamated. I can get different sort of data from the different methods. With the walking methods, I can find out where they feel physically comfortable within the places. With the drawing method, I can get their idea of their Manchester. With the semi-structured interviews, I can try to extract more of the knowledge about their diasporic history, or about their family history maybe, or about their way of seeing Manchester. So these sort of methods basically can get me a rich data. And I was thinking, after very careful consideration, I decided these three methods can actually go together, and we can sort of get the data for my research. In regards with how a space can be queer, the idea is about space is basically produced through power, practice, and bodies. Manchester Gay Village, for instance, is coded as queer because, but for whose queerness? So my research basically shows that when queer Pakistani participants enter those spaces, they frequently encounter the hypervisibility of white Western queerness that effectively renders them invisible or out of that space. So a place can simultaneously be queer and exclusionary. So through walking methods, participants will be showing me which space feels livable, which feels hostile, which requires constant negotiation of their identity within the spaces as well. In regards with the idea of centering the gay village, it's the initial idea and the initial plan was to center the gay village, but when with the start of my participants interviews, I came to know that the gay village is basically mostly white centric, and my participant, even though I've just conducted one interview, but my participants, they don't really feel comfortable within gay spaces, so the idea sort of shifted that their place where they can feel performing their identity can not only be gay village but the other places within the city as well. In terms of where community building sits within my research, it's actually quite central both theoretically and methodologically as well. So theoretically, I'm drawing on intersectionality and queer of color critique to argue that for queer Pakistanis, community is never a given. It has to be actively constructed and negotiated across multiple axes of difference, including race, religion, gender, and migration status as well. Community building is therefore not a background context to my research. It is more like a core political and social processes, trying to understand and document. Methodologically, community building is also embedded in how I am conducting the research itself. The walking interviews and the participatory drawing exercise aren't sort of extractive tools that simply take knowledge from the participants. They sort of create conditions for shared articulation for the participants to name and map experiences, and that are often rendered invisible within the mainstream LGBTQ plus spaces and within the Pakistani diaspora communities and the specific communities created for the Pakistani diaspora in Manchester. So yeah, it's sort of I'm sort of looking into the communities as well within my research. On the question of whether belonging comes from community or from the physical and affective space, my argument is that for queer Pakistanis in Manchester, these can't be neatly separated. Belonging operates across all these registers simultaneously. A space feels livable not just because of its physical geography, but because of who else inhabits it and what emotional safety it holds. During my first interview with my participants, he did mention that he feels more insecure within his own people who belong to Pakistan, and more specifically heterosexual people within his community, and he feels more comfortable within the white queer people. So I think it sort of varies for a participant to participant. Obviously I've just conducted first interview, but definitely it's sort of I will definitely be looking into it through my participants whilst obviously conducting my research. Thank you for such a positive feedback, Tanvi. It's really helpful. I have actually thought about when I was thinking of the recruitment of my participants, I was actually thinking to get some mixed kind of participants, like they can either be the first generation migrants, like my very first participant, or they can be from the second or third generation living in Manchester. I think it will be providing me further a good comparative studies as well between the participants who born and bred in Manchester and the one who have been migrated from Pakistan. But yeah, I have actually thought about it. Thank you, and I'm actually thinking to sort of have the diversity among my participants through because of their migration status. So it's sort of open to all sort of migrants basically, or even if they have been living in Manchester. So in regards with Pakistani queers community visibility and about chosen invisibility, I would say I as Kemi Adim has worked at how the Black queer in America chose counter public spaces to present themselves because they did not want to be visible in the mainstream queer spaces or the public spaces. And definitely about the visibility in a sort of racist context. Exactly, this is where sort of intersectionality becomes indispensable. So my participants do face dual marginalization and double bind. So within Manchester's mainstream LGBTQ plus spaces, they are marginalized because of the hyper-visibility of whiteness within their own community. And like in Pakistani diaspora, being visible as a queer is sort of a family rupture thing. It's a community exclusion thing as well, and religious condemnation as well. So sometimes it can be it maybe by choice they want not to be visible in the spaces or within the public spaces, but definitely I can going forward I can get more sort of information from my participants on this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Aqsa. Thank you, Christian, for very useful comments. Thank you, Tanvi, Paulo, insightful comments. Global South Network warmly welcomes any PhD student from any part of the world, from any disciplinary background, to share their PhD project, to receive interdisciplinary feedback. If you are interested in presenting your PhD project or participate in any capacity as discussant or peer commentator, please feel free to get in touch with me at leicgsn@gmail.com. Same time next week, let's meet our next guest speaker, Samara Sharaf, law PhD student at University of Manchester, again Manchester, and she is going to deliver her ongoing PhD project, Addressing the Post-Colonial Legal Inheritance. Does Transformative Constitutionalism Present a Solution? Next Wednesday at 3 p.m. Until then, look after yourself. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.